Have you ever experienced that mysterious moment when someone who once couldn't get enough of you suddenly becomes distant? Their messages grow shorter, their eyes no longer light up when you enter the room, and that magnetic pull that once seemed so powerful simply fades away. What if I told you that according to Carl Jung, one of history's most influential psychologists, this pattern isn't random chance or bad luck, but rather a profound psychological process playing out beneath the surface of consciousness? Today we're diving deep into the hidden currents of attraction and disconnection, not with simplistic tricks or manipulation tactics, but through understanding the authentic psychological dynamics that shape our deepest connections. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. There's that initial spark, that inexplicable chemistry. In those early moments, something powerful happens in our psyche that Jung called projection. We don't just see the person before us, we see a canvas onto which we project our deepest desires, our unacknowledged qualities, and sometimes the missing pieces of ourselves. A young attorney from Boston once told me, "The moment I met Sarah, I felt like I'd known her my entire life. She embodied this creative freedom I'd always wanted, but never allowed myself to have." What he was experiencing wasn't just attraction, it was recognition of his own suppressed creative nature reflected back at him. This is what Jung called anima and animus projections, the feminine aspects within men and masculine aspects within women that we often don't consciously embrace, instead projecting them onto those we're attracted to. But here's where the trouble begins. When someone loses interest, it's rarely as simple as falling out of love. According to Jung, what often happens is a natural psychological process of withdrawing projections. Consider this. In the early stages of attraction, we're not fully seeing the real person. We're seeing our own unconscious material, our hopes, ideals, and unacknowledged qualities overlaid upon them. This creates an intoxicating energy. It feels magical precisely because it's activating something deep within us. A woman from Chicago described it perfectly. "When I first met David, he seemed like this embodiment of strength and decisiveness. Everything I struggled with, being around him, made me feel complete somehow. But 6 months in, I started noticing how controlling those same qualities could be. The very thing that attracted me began to repel me." What she experienced was the natural withdrawal of her animus projection. As she came to see her partner more clearly as a real, flawed human being, rather than the carrier of her own projected qualities, the chemistry changed. This isn't a failure, it's an invitation to growth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This profound statement from Jung perfectly captures what happens in our relationships. When someone loses interest, often what's happening is an encounter with shadow material, the parts of ourselves we've disowned or repressed. Initially, we're drawn to people who carry our shadow in a positive form. They embody qualities we've denied in ourselves, but secretly admire. A tech executive from Seattle shared, "I was intensely drawn to my partner's emotional expressiveness. I grew up in a household where showing feelings was considered weakness. But after the honeymoon phase, I found myself increasingly irritated by the very emotional nature I'd once been attracted to." This pattern repeats across countless relationships. In America, we fall for people who carry aspects of our shadow, only to later reject them for the very qualities that initially drew us in. This isn't shallow fickleness, it's the psyche's complicated dance with its own completeness. Every relationship contains what Jung might call an unconscious contract, unspoken expectations and projections that both partners bring to the table. When interest fades, often it's because this contract is being broken in ways neither person fully understands. Maya, a teacher from Austin, described it perfectly. "In the beginning, I unconsciously signed up to be his muse, his inspiration. He signed up to be my stability, my rock. When I started pursuing my own creative projects and needing less stability, something shifted. He became distant, almost overnight." What Maya experienced wasn't random. The unconscious contract was being rewritten, and her partner's psyche was responding to that shift. This happens all across America, in bedrooms and living rooms, in text messages left unread, and in subtle shifts of body language. The unconscious contracts we form shape our attractions and disconnections in ways we rarely fully understand. Perhaps the most powerful insight Jung offers us about lost interest comes through his concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming more fully ourselves. Sometimes interest fades not because something is wrong, but because the relationship has served its purpose in each person's journey toward wholeness. The very tension that once generated such powerful attraction has facilitated growth, and now the psyche is ready to move in a new direction. A writer from Portland put it this way: "Looking back, I can see how each significant relationship in my life corresponded with a different chapter of my own development. The intense attraction I felt towards certain people wasn't random. They were holding pieces of myself I needed to reclaim at that particular moment. This perspective transforms how we view lost interest. Rather than seeing it solely as rejection or failure, we can recognize it as part of the soul's movement toward completeness. In American culture especially, we're experts at crafting personas, the social masks Jung described that we wear to fit into society's expectations. Dating often becomes an elaborate dance of personas, with each person presenting their most polished, carefully curated self. But Jung reminds us that authentic connection can only happen when we move beyond the persona and risk showing our true selves. Interest often fades when the inevitable happens. The personas begin to slip, revealing the more complex, contradictory humans beneath. James, a marketing professional from Miami, shared, "For the first few months, I was the perpetual fun guy, always planning adventures, always upbeat. When work stress hit and I went through a period of anxiety, I couldn't maintain that energy. That's when he started pulling away." The most painful loss of interest often happens not when someone rejects us, but when they reject our authentic self after we've gathered the courage to show it. Yet paradoxically, this rejection of authenticity creates the space for deeper connections with those who can accept our wholeness. A uniquely American aspect of this dynamic lies in our culture's strong emphasis on individualism. Jung recognized that while individuation is essential, Western cultures often overemphasize separation at the expense of connection. Many Americans experience a push-pull in relationships, drawn toward deep connection, yet simultaneously fearful of losing their independence. This cultural pattern creates a distinct flavor of lost interest that often has little to do with the partner and everything to do with this internal tension. A management consultant from New York reflected, "Whenever a relationship started getting serious, I'd find myself focusing on small incompatibilities, building them up in my mind until they seemed like deal breakers. It took years of reflection to realize I wasn't actually losing interest in these women. I was afraid of losing myself." This fear of engulfment, of losing one's individual identity within a relationship, drives countless patterns of withdrawal and lost interest across America's dating landscape. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of experiences common to our species, helps explain how cultural narratives shape our expectations in relationships. In American society, we're bombarded with stories of immediate chemistry, perfect compatibility, and effortless connection. When the reality of relationship involves challenge or ordinariness, many interpret these natural phases as lost interest rather than the normal rhythms of human connection. A sociology professor from Chicago noted, "What many people experience as their partner losing interest is actually just the relationship transitioning from the projection phase to something more grounded. But because our cultural mythology doesn't prepare us for this transition, we misinterpret it as the end rather than a new beginning. This collective misunderstanding leads countless potentially meaningful connections to dissolve precisely when they could be evolving into something deeper." If Jung were advising someone facing the pain of a partner's waning interest, his approach wouldn't involve manipulation tactics or surface-level changes. Instead, he would invite a journey inward toward greater consciousness. The path forward begins with a radical question: what parts of yourself are you meeting through this person's withdrawal? What aspects of your own psyche are being illuminated by this painful experience? A therapist from Los Angeles shared this perspective. When we're triggered by someone pulling away, it's rarely just about them. It's about our own attachment patterns, our relationship with rejection, and often our relationship with ourselves. The person who's withdrawing becomes a mirror, reflecting our deepest wounds and greatest opportunities for growth. This doesn't minimize the genuine pain of lost connection. Rather, it transforms that pain from meaningless suffering into a container for potential transformation. What if the pain of someone losing interest in you isn't just heartbreak, but a powerful opportunity for transformation? What if, as Jung suggested, these moments of rejection are actually portals to reclaiming disowned parts of yourself. In Jungian psychology, alchemy serves as a powerful metaphor for the transformation of the psyche. Just as alchemists aim to turn lead into gold, our emotional suffering can transmute into profound self-knowledge. When someone loses interest in us, we enter what Jung might call the nigredo phase, the blackening, the dissolution, the psychological death that precedes rebirth. This painful process strips away our illusions and defenses, creating the conditions for authentic transformation. A musician from Nashville described her experience. When Jake suddenly went cold after 3 months of intense connection, I felt like I was dying. But in that darkness, I started dreaming vividly for the first time in years. It was like my unconscious was finally able to speak to me. This is precisely what Jung observed, that our most painful experiences often crack open the rigid structures of the ego, allowing deeper aspects of the psyche to emerge. When someone withdraws their positive projections from us, we're suddenly confronted with the qualities we were counting on them to carry for us. The strength, creativity, or worthiness we saw in them and felt in their presence seems to disappear along with their interest. This creates a profound opportunity to reclaim these qualities as our own. A software developer from San Francisco shared, "My partner used to call me brilliant and visionary. When he lost interest and those reflections disappeared, I realized how much I'd been depending on his view of me, rather than truly owning those qualities myself." This is the essence of what Jung called withdrawing projections, the painful but necessary process of recognizing that the qualities we admire or desire in others actually originate within us. According to Jung, what we find most painful or triggering often points directly to our shadow, the disowned aspects of ourselves that we've pushed into the unconscious. When someone loses interest in us, it typically activates our deepest rejection wounds. Rather than simply suffering through this activation, we can use it as a map to parts of ourselves that need integration. A teacher from Philadelphia explained, "Being too much was my core wound from childhood. When my partner started pulling away, saying he needed space, all those old feelings of being overwhelming and uncontainable came flooding back. But this time, instead of trying to make myself smaller, I asked myself what this too muchness might actually be, and realized it was my life force, my passion, my true vitality that I'd been suppressing." This is shadow integration in action, using the pain of lost interest to recover vital aspects of ourselves that we've disowned out of fear or shame. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of navigating someone's waning interest is the opportunity it presents to separate our sense of worth from external validation. In American culture particularly, where achievement and social approval are so heavily emphasized, many of us unconsciously outsource our self-worth to our partners. When they pull away, we're forced to confront a crucial question: who am I without this person's admiration? Corporate executive from Chicago described this process. "When my relationship ended, I realized I'd been using her love as evidence that I was lovable. Without that external proof, I had to find the source of worthiness within myself. It was excruciating but ultimately liberating." This painful crucible often becomes the birthplace of true self-worth, not the fragile kind that requires constant external reinforcement, but the solid foundation that comes from recognizing our inherent value. For Jung, individuation, becoming your complete authentic self, was the core task of human life. Sometimes a partner's lost interest serves as a powerful catalyst for this process. When someone pulls away, particularly if they were attracted to a persona rather than our authentic self, it creates an opening to examine how much of our true nature we've been expressing in the relationship. A writer from Austin reflected, "Looking back, I can see that I'd been contorting myself to fit what I thought he wanted. When he lost interest anyway, despite all my shape-shifting, it finally hit me that the only path forward was radical authenticity." This realization, that performing and shape-shifting offers no real protection from rejection, often becomes the turning point that propels people toward genuine self-acceptance. One of Jung's most powerful archetypes is the wounded healer, the understanding that our own wounds, once acknowledged and integrated, become the source of our greatest gifts to others. The pain of someone losing interest in us can activate this archetype within us. As we navigate our own healing process, we develop capacities for empathy, wisdom, and presence that simply weren't accessible before. A therapist from Denver shared, "My worst heartbreak became the compost for my most effective work with clients." Having felt the full depth of rejection myself, I can sit with others in that same space without trying to rescue them from it. I know now that feeling the full truth of our experience, however painful, is the doorway to healing. This transformation, from wounded to healer, doesn't happen automatically. It requires the conscious choice to use our suffering as a catalyst for growth rather than a reason for bitterness or withdrawal. Jung developed a powerful technique called active imagination, a way of dialoguing with unconscious material through imagery, writing, or internal conversation. This approach offers a profound method for working with the pain of someone's lost interest. Rather than simply ruminating on the loss, we can engage it as a psychological figure with its own wisdom and message. A teacher from Minneapolis described her experience. "I started writing dialogues with the relationship itself, asking what it had come to teach me, why it had taken the form it did. The answers that emerged felt like they came from a much deeper place than my conscious mind. That process helped me see how the relationship's ending was actually aligned with my soul's evolution, even though my ego desperately wanted it to continue." This approach transforms rejection from something that happens to us into a meaningful chapter in our larger psychological development. What if recovering from lost interest and potentially rekindling it isn't about tactics or techniques, but about a deeper journey into wholeness? According to Jung, our relationships are profoundly influenced by archetypal patterns that have existed throughout human history. Understanding these patterns can transform how we navigate the ebb and flow of attraction. The lover archetype represents our capacity for connection, passion, and intimacy. When activated positively, it brings aliveness and engagement to relationships. But its shadow aspects, obsession, codependency, or emotional withdrawal, can emerge when interest begins to fade. A relationship coach from Los Angeles observed, "When someone starts pulling away, many people either chase harder or completely shut down. Both are shadow expressions of the lover archetype, either overwhelming the other person with needs or preemptively abandoning the connection to protect ourselves." Jung would suggest that integrating the lover archetype, embracing our desire for connection while respecting boundaries and maintaining our center, creates the psychological foundation for healthier attraction patterns. Throughout mythology, the death-rebirth cycle appears as a fundamental pattern of transformation. Jung recognized this same pattern in our psychological life, including our relationships. When interest fades in a relationship, we're experiencing a kind of death, the end of a particular way of relating. Rather than desperately trying to resurrect what was, Jungian psychology invites us to allow this death fully, knowing that it creates the conditions for something new to emerge. A couples therapist from Seattle explained, "The relationships that successfully navigate through periods of lost interest are the ones where both people can tolerate the uncertainty of this death-rebirth process. They don't cling to the old connection, but they also don't completely abandon ship. They stay present as something new tries to emerge between them." This willingness to enter the unknown space between what was and what could be often determines whether interest can be rekindled in a transformed way. Joseph Campbell, building on Jung's work, identified the hero's journey as a universal story pattern across cultures. This same pattern applies to creating authentic attraction. The journey begins with separation, the courage to stand fully in your own identity rather than molding yourself to match someone else's desires. It continues through initiation, facing the challenges of true vulnerability and authentic expression. And it culminates in return, bringing your whole integrated self back into relationship. A writer from New York reflected, "After my partner's interest faded, I realized how much of myself I'd been hiding. The real journey wasn't about getting him back. It was about reclaiming myself. Ironically, when I fully committed to that path, the dynamic between us completely shifted. The attraction rekindled, but on a much more authentic foundation." This pattern appears repeatedly in successful relationship renewals across America, not as a manipulation tactic, but as a genuine process of becoming more fully yourself. Jung emphasized the importance of the wise elder archetype, often called the senex or crone, in guiding us through life's challenges. This archetype represents the accumulated wisdom of experience and the longer view that comes with psychological maturity. When facing someone's waning interest, activating this inner wisdom can transform our response from reactive to reflective. Psychologist from Chicago shared, "I encourage clients to imagine how their 80-year-old self might view this situation. That perspective inevitably brings more compassion, patience, and wisdom to their actions. Decisions made from this archetypal energy tend to serve both their growth and the relationship's potential. This shift from the immediacy of the wounded ego to the perspective of the wise elder often creates the psychological space for interest to potentially regenerate. Jung's concepts of anima, the feminine aspect within men, and animus, the masculine aspect within women, offer profound insight into the dynamics of attraction and lost interest. When we project these inner figures onto our partners, we initially feel intensely drawn to them. But if we don't recognize these projections for what they are, aspects of ourselves seeking integration, the attraction inevitably destabilizes. A Jungian analyst from Boston explained, "True renewal of attraction happens when we start the process of reclaiming our projections. Rather than needing our partner to carry the qualities we've disowned in ourselves, we begin integrating them. This actually frees the relationship from an impossible psychological burden. This integration creates the foundation for what Jung might call a more individuated connection, one based on two whole people choosing each other rather than two incomplete people trying to use each other to feel whole." Jung used the Greek word temenos to describe a protected, sacred space where psychological transformation can occur. In relationships experiencing waning interest, consciously creating this kind of container can be essential for potential renewal. This isn't about grand gestures or forced conversations, but about establishing a quality of presence and intention that honors both the relationship and each person's individual journey. A couples counselor from Portland described it. "When couples come to me with one partner having lost interest, we work on creating a temenos, a space with clear boundaries, where both people agree to show up with authenticity and respect without demanding specific outcomes. In that container, the truth of what wants to happen next can emerge organically." This approach stands in stark contrast to the anxiety-driven strategies that often backfire when trying to rekindle someone's interest. Perhaps Jung's most enduring contribution was his emphasis on finding meaning in our psychological experiences. When someone loses interest in us, the question becomes not just, "How do I get them back?" but, "What is the deeper meaning of this experience in my life journey?" By approaching lost interest as meaningful, rather than merely painful, we open to the transformative potential it contains, both for ourselves and possibly for the relationship itself. A spiritual director from Santa Fe shared, "The clients who navigate these situations most successfully are the ones who can ask, 'What is trying to be born through this experience?' Rather than seeing themselves as victims of someone's changing feelings, they recognize themselves as participants in a meaningful psychological process." This shift from victimhood to meaningful participation doesn't guarantee that interest will be rekindled, but it ensures that regardless of the relationship's outcome, we emerge more whole, more conscious, and more capable of authentic connection. The path to potentially reversing lost interest isn't found in manipulation or self-abandonment, but in the courageous journey toward becoming more fully yourself. As Jung himself said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In that becoming lies the deepest magnetic pull, the authentic attraction that can withstand the tests of time and change.